General Motors just made a mistake, so catastrophic, it might redefine how we think about automotive quality control failures and their solutions. As of now, 36 vehicles have failed catastrophically after receiving the remedy prescribed by General Motors. Federal regulators have opened a third investigation to examine whether this so-called fix is fundamentally flawed from the start. We are talking about sudden, complete engine failure at highway speeds with zero warning. No check engine light, no knocking sounds, no time to pull over safely. Just instant loss of power steering, reduced braking capability, and your $70,000 Cadillac Escalade or GMC Sierra turning into a 2-ton paperweight in the middle of rush hour traffic. When you hear what the General Motors solution actually consists of, you will understand why critics are calling this one of the most shockingly bad corporate responses to a safety crisis in modern automotive history. The recall remedy that General Motors has prescribed for nearly 600,000 vehicles involves inspecting the engine for a specific diagnostic trouble code, draining the oil to check for metallic debris, and if the engine passes both tests, simply changing the oil from 0W20 to 0W40 specification. That is it. An oil change. For engines that have connecting rods literally punching through the engine block and crankshaft bearings welding themselves to the crankshaft from extreme heat and friction. General Motors is telling owners that switching to thicker oil will somehow compensate for crankshafts manufactured outside dimensional tolerances and connecting rods embedded with machining sediment that was never properly cleaned during manufacturing. The technical rationale General Motors provides is that 0W40 oil offers approximately 35% higher viscosity at operating temperatures, theoretically maintaining a better lubricating film on bearing surfaces. This is the same oil specification used in high-performance engines like the C8 Corvette. But here's what General Motors is not telling you. Thicker oil cannot remachine parts back to correct specifications. It cannot remove sediment already embedded in crankshaft oil galleries. It cannot fix journals that arrive from suppliers with surface finishes either too smooth to retain lubricating oil or improperly polished. All it does is mask the fundamental manufacturing defects that caused this crisis in the first place. And the proof that this remedy is inadequate could not be more clear. 36 owners have now reported complete engine failure after completing the recall procedure. These are not vehicles that skipped the recall or ignored the fix. These are owners who took their trucks and sport utility vehicles to authorized General Motors dealerships, had the prescribed work performed exactly as specified, and then suffered the exact same catastrophic failures the recall was supposedly designed to prevent. On January 16, 2026, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration opened an entirely new investigation, specifically examining the adequacy of the remedy itself. When federal regulators open an investigation into your fix, you know something has gone terribly wrong. This is how they got there. The manufacturing defects at the root of this crisis are almost unbelievable in their preventability. The L87 6.2-liter V8 engine that powers General Motors' most profitable trucks and sport utility vehicles contains components sourced from 2 different suppliers. Crankshafts came from a supplier facility in Mexico. These crankshafts arrived with journal dimensions out of specification and with improper surface finishes. Some journals were too smooth to retain the lubricating oil film. Others were improperly polished. Either condition creates a situation where metal bearings cannot maintain the microscopic oil film that prevents metal-on-metal contact. The connecting rods came from a supplier in Michigan, and these components contained embedded machining sediment and debris that was never properly cleaned after final processing. This contamination did not just stay on the connecting rods. It migrated through the lubrication system, clogging crankshaft oil galleries and starving bearings of the oil they desperately needed. When you combine out-of-spec crankshafts with contaminated connecting rods and then add restricted oil flow from clogged galleries, you have created the perfect storm for catastrophic bearing failure. And when these bearings fail, they fail spectacularly. Field reports describe rod bearings that have been found effectively welded to the crankshaft from extreme heat and friction. The metal literally bonds together from the temperatures generated by unlubricated contact. At that point, you have two possible outcomes. Either the engine seizes completely, locking up instantly and bringing your vehicle to an immediate halt, or the connecting rod breaks free and punches through the engine block, often accompanied by flames and smoke as oil sprays onto hot exhaust components. Both scenarios happen suddenly, without warning, and often at highway speeds where the consequences could be deadly. General Motors identified an affected build window spanning from March 1st, 2021 through May 31st, 2024. The company claims that manufacturing improvements implemented by June 1st, 2024 resolved both the crankshaft and connecting rod issues. But federal regulators are not convinced. In October 2025, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration escalated their investigation to include an additional 286,000 vehicles from the 2019 and the 2020 model years, suggesting the problem extends beyond the General Motors defined window. And given that some brand new 2025 model year Escalades have already failed with fewer than 1,000 miles on the odometer, those claims about manufacturing improvements ring rather hollow. The affected vehicle list reads like a greatest hits collection of General Motors' most expensive and profitable products. 153,000 GMC Sierra, 1,500 trucks. 107,000 Chevrolet Silverado, 1,500 trucks. 82,000 GMC Yukons. Nearly 80,000 Cadillac Escalades. 60,000 GMC Yukon XLS. 46,000 Cadillac Escalade ESVS, 44,000 Chevrolet Tahoes, 22,000 Chevrolet Suburbans. These are not economy vehicles. These are $70,000 to $100,000, plus premium trucks and luxury sport utility vehicles that General Motors markets as the pinnacle of American automotive engineering. And the failure patterns are absolutely terrifying in their unpredictability. While some owners report precursor symptoms like knocking noises, check engine lights, or hesitation under acceleration, a significant portion describes sudden catastrophic failure with absolutely no detectability beforehand. You are driving normally one moment, and the next moment your engine is gone. Field complaint data shows that 14,332 incidents involved complete loss of propulsion. That represents roughly half of all complaints, and each one of those incidents represents a family that was suddenly stranded, often in dangerous traffic conditions, with no power steering and reduced braking assistance. One owner wrote to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration describing how they were traveling at 65 miles per hour down the freeway when the truck suddenly turned off completely. They were stopped in the middle of the highway with their family in the truck. No warning lights, no sounds, just instant failure. Another owner reported their engine seizing at 70 miles per hour on an interstate with their children in the vehicle. The sudden loss of power steering and braking assist made it extremely difficult to maneuver to the shoulder. These are not hypothetical safety risks. These are real incidents that have already resulted in 12 documented crashes and 42 fires. The low-mileage failures are particularly damning evidence of how severe the manufacturing defects truly are. Some engines have seized with as few as 1,200 miles on the odometer. One report documented complete failure at just 4 miles. 4 miles. That is barely enough distance to drive from the dealership to your home. A December 2024 complaint described a brand new 2025 Escalade failing at 953 miles. When engines fail this early, it is not a question of wear or maintenance. It is a pure manufacturing defect. The components were so far outside acceptable tolerances that they could not even survive the break-in period. Dealers are reporting being completely overwhelmed by the volume of failures. One service advisor posted online that their dealership receives 3 to 5 Escalades towed in for engine failures every single week. At least half their service lot is constantly full of Escalades, waiting for replacement engines that are back-ordered for 3 months. Some owners have been waiting 7 months or longer for replacement engines. And here is the cruel irony. Those replacement engines carry the same manufacturing flaws as the originals. Multiple owners have reported that their replacement engines failed within weeks or months of installation, suggesting General Motors has not actually fixed the underlying supply chain and quality control problems. This is a timeline of the crisis General Motors has caused for itself, and it shows how badly General Motors failed its customers. The L87 6.2-liter V8 engine was introduced in 2019. Field complaints about engine failures began accumulating in April 2021. In February 2022, General Motors opened its first internal investigation into the failures. That investigation was closed without any action. In June 2023, General Motors opened a second internal investigation. It was again closed without any action. In July 2024, General Motors opened a third internal investigation. Once more, it was closed without any action, a clear pattern of inaction. It was not until January 16, 2025, that the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration opened an independent investigation after receiving 39 official complaints. Only then, 3 months later, on April 24, 2025, did General Motors finally issue a recall. But by that point, the agency had accumulated 28,102 complaints, documenting 12 crashes and 42 fires. General Motors conducted 3 separate internal investigations spanning more than 3 years, and in all that time, they took no action to protect consumers. No recalls, no service bulletins, no warnings. Just engines continuing to fail while the company apparently hoped the problem would somehow resolve itself. The gap between General Motors' first internal investigation in February 2022 and the eventual recall in April 2025 spans more than 3 years. During those 3 years, 28,102 complaints piled up. Families were stranded on highways, crashes occurred, fires broke out, and General Motors did nothing. This timeline forms the central element of the class action lawsuits now consolidated against the company, with plaintiffs alleging that General Motors knew about systemic defects since at least 2021 but prioritized production volume and profit margins over consumer safety. The legal response has been substantial. Powell versus General Motors, consolidated in the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Michigan, now encompasses 11 separate lawsuits filed against the company. The class includes all United States individuals who purchased affected 2019 to 2024 trucks and sport utility vehicles equipped with the L87 engine. Plaintiffs are seeking damages exceeding $5 million, alleging that General Motors knew about the defects, conducted multiple investigations without taking action, and that the recall remedy is egregiously inadequate and fails to address the fundamental manufacturing problems. A key piece of evidence that emerged in discovery is particularly damaging. A March 2023 General Motors internal bulletin warned dealers about no crank conditions and bearing problems. This internal document proves the company had knowledge of systemic issues 2 full years before issuing the recall. While General Motors was telling customers their vehicles were fine, internal communications were acknowledging widespread bearing failures. That kind of disconnect between internal knowledge and external messaging is exactly what regulators and juries look for when evaluating whether a company acted in bad faith. The financial consequences for General Motors have been severe. The company reported a $1.1 billion impact on second quarter 2025 earnings from the recall, combined with other cost pressures. Their fourth quarter 2024 results included a $3 billion net loss driven partly by recall-related restructuring charges. Chief Financial Officer Paul Jacobson acknowledged during second quarter earnings that warranty costs had increased by $300 million, tied specifically to the L87 recall, saying the company was not happy with warranty trends and was facing these challenges head-on. But being unhappy about warranty costs is not the same as actually fixing the underlying problems. Beyond the direct financial hit, the reputational damage may prove even more costly in the long term. Multiple owners in online forums have said they will switch to Ford or Ram trucks after decades of General Motors loyalty. Trade-in values on affected vehicles have reportedly dropped by $3,000 or more at some dealerships. Customers who paid $70,000 to $100,000 for premium trucks and luxury sport utility vehicles are understandably furious that their flagship vehicles are experiencing catastrophic failures that General Motors seems unable or unwilling to properly address. One longtime customer summarized the sentiment perfectly, saying their premium flagship Cadillac Escalade is now diminished to the grade of a cheap economy car. The timing of this crisis could not be worse for General Motors. The company has been positioning its full-size truck and sport utility vehicle lineup as the profit engine that funds billions in electric vehicle development. These vehicles carry the highest profit margins in General Motors' portfolio. When customers at the $70,000 to $100,000 plus price point lose confidence in quality and reliability, the financial implications ripple throughout the business model. You cannot fund electric vehicle investments with warranty claims and lost sales. What makes the situation even more frustrating is that the L87 crisis does not exist in isolation. General Motors V8 engines have struggled with cylinder deactivation technology for nearly 2 decades. Active fuel management was introduced in the mid-2000s, and from the very beginning, the specialized hydraulic lifters required for the system proved failure-prone. Owners of V8 engines in 5.3-liter, 6-liter, and 6.2-liter displacements, equipped with active fuel management, have reported collapsed lifters, bent pushrods, and camshaft damage at mileages ranging from 75,000 to 125,000 miles. General Motors made incremental changes in 2010 and later years, but they never fully resolved the underlying issues with active fuel management. Then in 2019, they introduced dynamic fuel management, an even more complex system that can deactivate all 8 cylinders compared to 4 with the older technology. Dynamic fuel management uses 17 different firing patterns, putting stress on all 16 valve lifters instead of just 8. This added complexity has only multiplied the failure modes. The L87 crankshaft and bearing defects represent a separate but concurrent failure mode relative to the active fuel management and dynamic fuel management lifter issues. Some unfortunate owners have experienced both problems: lifter failures followed by bearing failures, or bearing failures followed by lifter failures. This pattern suggests systemic quality and engineering challenges with the General Motors Truck 5.8 program extending back nearly 20 years. At some point, you have to question whether the fundamental approach to these engines is sound. To put General Motors' recall in industry context, they are not alone in facing major quality challenges. Ford logged 153 recalls in 2025, covering 12.9 million vehicles, nearly double General Motors' previous industry record of 77 recalls in 2014. Ford warranty spending reached $4.8 billion in 2023, with $1,203 set aside per vehicle for potential repairs. Stellantis recalled 2.78 million vehicles across 53 actions, including 320,000 Jeep 4xe models for battery fires. But what distinguishes General Motors' L87? Situation from those other recalls is the severity of the defect and its preventability. Many recalls address software glitches, minor component wear, or issues discovered during routine testing. Catastrophic engine failure at highway speeds that results in sudden loss of propulsion, steering, and braking represents a life safety issue of the highest order. And the fact that General Motors conducted 3 internal investigations without taking action suggests the company had multiple opportunities to address the problem before it reached crisis proportions. The most critical aspect remains the remedy itself. Critics and class action plaintiffs argue that switching to thicker oil is nothing more than a band-aid solution that does not address the root cause manufacturing defects. The oil change cannot remove sediment embedded in oil galleries. It cannot correct crankshafts manufactured outside tolerance specifications. It cannot fix connecting rods contaminated with machining debris. All it does is slightly increase the viscosity of the lubricating film, buying maybe a little more time before the inevitable failure occurs. And that thicker oil comes with its own set of problems that General Motors is not exactly advertising. The 0W40 specification reduces fuel economy compared to the 0W20 oil the vehicles were designed to use. That means owners are now getting fewer miles per gallon than the EPA ratings they relied upon when purchasing the vehicle. And 0W40 costs more than 0W20 at every oil change, imposing ongoing additional expenses on owners who already paid premium prices for vehicles that should not have these problems in the first place. Class action lawsuits allege that owners now face two bad options: do nothing and risk catastrophic engine failure, or get the recall and pay hundreds of dollars more for gasoline over the life of the vehicle. Perhaps most troubling of all is that General Motors maintains the problem has been fixed in vehicles built after June 1st, 2024. The company claims manufacturing improvements at supplier facilities have addressed both the crankshaft and connecting rod issues. But we have already seen brand new 2025 model year vehicles failing with fewer than 1,000 miles. We have seen replacement engines fail shortly after installation. And we have 36 documented cases of vehicles failing after receiving the recall remedy. At what point does the pattern of evidence overcome General Motors' assurances that everything is now fine? The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration clearly has doubts, which is why they expanded their investigation in October 2025 to include vehicles outside General Motors' defined build window, and why they opened an entirely new investigation in January 2026, specifically examining whether the remedy actually works. Engineering analysis investigations like these typically take 18 months or longer, meaning final resolution could extend into 2027 or beyond. In the meantime, nearly 600,000 vehicles remain on the road, with a fix that federal regulators are actively questioning. For affected owners, the situation presents an impossible dilemma. The recall remedy is free at any General Motors dealer and includes inspection, the oil change if the engine passes, and a 10-year or 150,000-mile extended warranty. But given the 36 documented post-remedy failures, is that warranty worth the paper it is printed on? And even if the warranty eventually covers a replacement engine, what about the safety risk of sudden highway failure in the meantime? What about being stranded with your family in dangerous traffic? What about the diminished resale value that will follow these vehicles for years? Some owners are pursuing lemon law claims under state statutes, which can potentially entitle them to vehicle buybacks, replacements, or cash compensation. California law allows for up to 3 times damages for willful violations. Others are pursuing Magnuson-Moss Warranty Act claims under federal law for breach of warranty. Most owners are automatically included in the class action lawsuit unless they specifically opt out. Some are pursuing individual arbitration or litigation for damages that extend beyond what the class action might recover. But here's the fundamental problem. None of these legal remedies can undo the betrayal of trust that has occurred. Customers who paid $70,000 to $100,000 for what General Motors marketed as premium, reliable, well-engineered vehicles have discovered their trucks and sport utility vehicles contain manufacturing defects so severe that engines can fail at 4 miles. They have learned that General Motors conducted 3 internal investigations over 3 years without taking action to protect them. They have been offered a remedy that amounts to an oil change and a warranty, while 36 vehicles have already failed even after receiving that fix. And they have watched federal regulators open 3 separate investigations, because even the government does not believe General Motors has adequately addressed the problem. The broader implications extend beyond the affected owners. This crisis raises fundamental questions about how automotive companies manage quality control when sourcing critical components from suppliers. General Motors blamed the defects on supplier manufacturing and quality issues, positioning itself as a victim of supplier failures. But General Motors chose those suppliers, and General Motors approved their manufacturing processes. General Motors quality control systems were supposed to catch dimensional problems and contamination before components were installed in engines. The buck stops with General Motors, not with faceless suppliers in Mexico and Michigan. It also raises questions about the effectiveness of internal investigation processes at major corporations. When a company conducts 3 separate investigations into the same problem over 3 years and closes all 3 without taking corrective action, something is profoundly broken in how safety issues are evaluated and escalated. Were the investigations genuinely attempting to identify and fix problems, Or were they primarily checking boxes to document that investigations occurred? The timeline suggests the latter. This crisis also highlights the limitations of the current recall system. General Motors only issued a recall after the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration opened an independent investigation and 28,000 complaints had accumulated. Left to its own devices, General Motors appeared content to close internal investigations without action indefinitely. Only external pressure from regulators forced the recall, and now even that recall is under investigation for being inadequate. At what point do we acknowledge that voluntary recalls by manufacturers are insufficient to protect consumers from companies that prioritize short-term profits over long-term quality and safety? The story of the General Motors L87 6.2-liter V8 crisis is ultimately a story about institutional failure at multiple levels. Suppliers failed to manufacture components to specification. General Motors failed to catch those defects through quality control. The company failed to act on 3 internal investigations, and when forced to issue a recall, they appear to have implemented a remedy that does not actually fix the fundamental problem. Now federal regulators are investigating the investigation, which is roughly the bureaucratic equivalent of your teacher calling your parents because you forged their signature on a failing test. For men over 30 who remember when American automotive engineering meant something and who remember when General Motors products were synonymous with quality and reliability, this crisis represents a particularly bitter disappointment. These are the vehicles we grew up aspiring to own. A fully loaded Cadillac Escalade or GMC Yukon Denali was the marker of having made it, of success and achievement. To discover that these $70,000 status symbols contain manufacturing defects so severe that engines fail at single-digit mileage, and that the company response is to change the oil and hope for the best, feels like a betrayal. Not just of customers, but of the legacy that General Motors is supposed to represent. The question now is what comes next. Will General Motors ultimately have to expand the recall to include the additional 286,000 vehicles that regulators are examining? Will they be forced to develop an actual fix that addresses the root cause defects, rather than just masking symptoms with thicker oil? Will criminal charges be filed if evidence emerges that executives knew about safety risks and deliberately chose not to act? Will the class action lawsuits result in massive settlements that force real accountability? Or will General Motors successfully run out the clock, betting that public attention will fade and most owners will simply accept their extended warranties and move on? What we know for certain is that 36 vehicles have already failed after receiving the recall remedy, and federal regulators have opened a 3rd investigation specifically questioning whether that remedy is adequate. We know that engines are failing with as few as 4 miles on the odometer, proving the defects are catastrophically severe. We know General Motors conducted 3 internal investigations without taking action to protect consumers. And we know that nearly 600,000 families are driving vehicles that federal regulators believe may contain unresolved safety defects. General Motors may have thought they could manage this crisis with an oil change and an extended warranty. They may have believed that customers would accept thicker oil as a reasonable solution to manufacturing defects. They may have calculated that the financial cost of properly fixing the problem exceeded the cost of handling warranty claims and legal settlements. But what they failed to account for is that trust, once broken, is nearly impossible to rebuild. When 36 vehicles fail even after receiving the prescribed fix, when federal regulators open investigations into those investigations, when customers paying $100,000 for luxury vehicles are left stranded on highways, General Motors has not just failed to fix a problem. General Motors has dug its own grave.